I've talked about in a previous episode, I semi-recently was in a breakup from a relationship that I was in for about 5 years. And the hardest part about breaking up is realizing that a person that you not only loved and trusted, but someone you were vulnerable to is walking away from you. And someone who you let basically reach inside your rib cage and grab your heart and squeeze it as hard as they want, and you did the same to them, they're walking away from you. And now that I'm single, the hardest thing is being vulnerable with myself. Being vulnerable to all my emotions and being vulnerable to even the dating scene. Fuck, it's tough. It can be really, really tough. Today we're talking about vulnerability. I feel like that was a real downer to be brought into, but at the same time, vulnerability is kind of it's never brought up in a necessarily positive light, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's always pretty dark. It's
Yeah.
always pretty deep because it's always deep. There's really there's really no vanity level of vulnerability.
Yeah. And even like me sharing, kind of like opening up on this podcast about like I was in a breakup and I was vulnerable to a person, and now I'm vulnerable to my emotions in the dating scene, and I'm being vulnerable to the audience that's listening and saying like, yeah, I have been feeling emotions in the past 6 to 7 months. Obviously, I'm in a much different space. I'm in a much happier, awesomer state than like the day the breakup occurred. There's been an uphill progression, certainly, but definitely like we just had the holidays, and that can be weird, and also a time where you feel vulnerable, especially because I just learned this term. It's called cuffing season, where people are trying to handcuff each other like into a relationship. So yeah, you're giving me the space right now that is perfect.
At first I thought you meant cupping. And I was like, oh, I don't know, man. School's usually out. So I thought cupping season's like fucking March, like after spring break. But cuffing, that's a really good term. Like, do you kind of believe it?
Do I believe that? Oh, I do believe that once it gets cold, it's cuffing season. Like, at least in like the Midwest, like, because then the holidays roll around and you want somebody to cuddle up with. You want somebody that you like. You want somebody to maybe not bring to the family dinner, but at least like go have drinks after your Thanksgiving dinner and like bitch about your family with. You want some of that. I think it exists. Now, was I prey to it? Not necessarily, but I do think cuffing season exists.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really been part of that world because I usually save the most money around Valentine's Day. So, but I could definitely see that because there's this mood in the air that we have to be together, and depending on where you live, it might be cold as fuck outside. So we're trying to just not die, you know, cuddle up, cozy up, and then, you know, give thanks and then show love, you know, one time of the year, and just, you know, tell the people like who matter, you know, only on this part of the year though, like in February. Nah, fuck it. Or not, like, okay, February 14th, yeah, but like May, yeah, who gives a fuck?
Well, because think about this. It's like when it gets cold outside and dark, it gets dark earlier and earlier, you're like receding into your home and you're more likely to be alone. And it sucks to be alone. So why not have a person on the couch next to you to be alone with? And then you guys can warm each other up by your fire and cuddle and watch stupid movies and, I don't know, have some drinks. Like, that's a real thing. I definitely, and especially like something about the holidays is just like, can be heart-wrenching. Like, I never really understood when people said like the holidays can be a really hard time of year for people, and I really didn't get that until like this past holiday season. And I really only was struck with it like a couple times, right? These moments of like, fuck, I'm alone in the holidays for the first time in however long, blah blah blah. But so I never understood that till recently. But at the same time, like, I think that it's supposed to be a time where you're with together and you're with people you love, and especially the New Year and the phenomenon of getting kissed at midnight on New Year's, like, that's a thing that people subscribe to.
Yeah, I could see that.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm cool. I mean, honestly, like the past maybe, I don't know, past several New Year's, I've just been spending it with like more important people in my life as opposed to like romantic ones. So I'm cool with that because to me, I really feel New Year's. I really feel like the start, and I understand like the whole resolution thing is bullshit for a lot of people, but I really feel like a fresh start, you know.
I do too. I really do too. This year more than anything, like, I tried to make sure that my New Year's Day was like the ideal day, that what I wanted to come from 2018, I made sure I did on January 1st. So I like did yoga, worked out, practiced music, tried to do a little bit of schoolwork, talk with people that I love. Like, and I got this idea from, apparently in New Orleans, they eat this dish called Hoppin' John, which is supposed to bring you prosperity in the new year because it has collard greens and black-eyed peas. And the peas represent coins and the greens represent cash. So if you eat it, you're supposed to be prosperous throughout the year. So kind of taking that logic of like, oh, well, if I'm going to do this on New Year's Day and be prosperous, I'll do all the things that I want to come out of this year.
Sounds pretty badass.
It was a pretty good day, and there got to be this point where I was like, if this day is indicative of how 2018 is going to go, my 2018 is going to be great until about 3:30 every day when I say fuck it and just like give up on whatever I was going to accomplish for the day. But honestly, I don't think that's that bad, because there's something, I take a lot of like kind of joy in telling myself, you know what? I've done enough for today. I'm putting my bags down. I'm putting the work down. I'm just gonna be. I take a lot of like joy and like pleasure out of like, you know what? I'm gonna put this off till tomorrow. Or, you know what? I didn't accomplish it today, and that's fine.
Yeah, and that's good. Like, so did you kind of feel the divisiveness from New Year's Eve to New Year's Day? So like, did you kind of feel like a new start, or did you kind of bring with you some baggage from 2017 into 2018?
I think I brought baggage for sure. I think it's interesting that you feel the newness of the new year. I feel like I brought stuff in, but I think maybe that was due to the fact I was really reflective of my 2017 and what I was leaving in 2017 and walking into 2018 with. So like, I did a lot of thinking about what a difference a year makes in terms of like what my New Year's Day was in 2017, which I remember vividly, and it wasn't necessarily a happy day. And then this year, where I actively tried to make it a good day and do all the things that, like, you know what, working out and yoga, like yoga I really do like for the reflectiveness and the like stretching out or whatever. Working out, have a love-hate relationship. Like when I'm really into it, I love it, but like I'm trying to get back into it. So it wasn't even like doing things just purely that I love, but doing things I know that are good for me. Yeah,
and that's good, because there've been quite a few times where I brought a lot of baggage into the new year.
Yeah.
This year, I would say I feel so much more hopeful about this year than I did even last year. Last year, I don't know, I was just in like this real like stagnant state of just kind of like, just darkness. And I really felt it. I was like, yeah, 2016, 2017, who gives a shit?
Yeah.
But this is like, I feel at least that I have some sort of new momentum, and I'm a little bit more at peace with things. I still struggle because, like, when you carry something for a very long time and when you finally drop it, your arms are fucking jelly. So I still, like, I'm kind of recovering because I can't lift heavy shit now. I mean, physically because of my surgery, but I kind of feel like that mentally now too. But I'm okay with that, so I gotta like recoup. But
I have two thoughts. One is that this podcast in and of itself is kind of an exercise in vulnerability, and like even you and I's relationship, which like we've known each other for I think about a year now, right?
I would say maybe about 2 years, but we've gotten really close this past year.
Yes, this past year we got really close. So for probably end of 2016 into 2017 and all of 2017, we really got close. And I think one of the things that brought us together is our willingness to talk about deep shit and be vulnerable. And like, of course you kind of ease into that, but I think both of us recognized within each other the ability to go to those deep, dark places and talk about with each other and really be vulnerable. Like I told, you were there and we talked about when I was in my relationship and then post-relationship and then, I was doing student teaching, then out of student teaching and all that stuff, the job hunt. You were there when I got my first job. Do you remember that?
Yeah, the car ride.
You were in the car. Yeah, no, you were in the car when I got the call that I got the job or whatever. So I think that this podcast itself kind of is an exercise in vulnerability. And obviously we're conscious of the audience and what we're telling you. But I always try to give as much of myself as I can, because I think that is beneficial. Maybe I'm too trusting or whatever. But my second thought on vulnerability was that when a new year happens, you're really vulnerable to what this new year will bring to you, good or bad.
Definitely. A lot of new shit's going to be happening, and it's one of those things where you kind of have to keep the momentum going, and the vulnerability really, it gets exhausting after a while, because deep down I know, like, in my fucking soul that I don't want to be a shut-in, and I don't want to, like, close myself off and have that distrust with people. Not necessarily people in general, but just, like, close my life off to trust, close my mind off, or close my life off to, intimacy. Yeah. Close my, like, life off to just kind of, figure it, like, just exploring and figuring shit out. And I think that's one of the things why we connect so well, is because we're trying to figure it out. Yeah. And we just don't necessarily have too many people to, like, bounce this shit off with casually. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, over coffee, for fuck's sake. How much more casual do you get? And usually crappy diner food.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, man, vulnerability, because, goddamn, man, it is a risk. It definitely is a risk, but it's, like, kind of like a risk worthwhile at the end of the day. So it does have a lot of other themes that we've been talking about with our previous podcast. So, like, there is some fear and there is some trust going on there. And there's definitely some topic of episode 2.
Insecurity
going on there.
Do you feel vulnerable that you just exposed that you forgot what our second topic was?
If this is 5 years ago, I would have been like, oh my God, I'm a big piece of shit. But I'm trying to be more honest with myself. Like, I'm trying to admit more shit I don't know and be okay with it.
That's probably a good thing, right? It's better to say, I don't know this. I feel like that. I don't know if I always, like, try to keep up appearances in that regard of, like, pretending when I'm really open when I don't know something.
Yeah. Like, sometimes I get into, like, a position where I wish I had the answer, so I try to, like, come up with one on the spot, because I don't want to, like, let that image down that, like, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. But now I'm just a lot more open, like, just like, hey, I just don't fucking know. And that has to come from a real, like, inner talk, like, with yourself. Yeah. Like, just to be, like, really vulnerable, and it's just kind of like clenching your fist at all times. Eventually it's gonna get exhausting. Yeah. And the grip won't be as strong as it was when you first started.
Very true.
So when you just kind of let go, like, it kind of gives you time to rest. So when you do have to clench that fist again, it's, like, even tighter. Yeah. And you kind of have to admit sometimes, like, you just don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Yeah. So. Well,
and when you admit you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, you're being vulnerable, right? You're saying, like, I don't fucking know. Because then that person could say, oh, you're an idiot, or, oh, well, let me tell you. I mean, it could go one of two ways. The person will say, oh, you're an idiot, or they'll just accept it or whatever. Do you think that vulnerability only comes in relationships?
No, I believe it comes from, that's perhaps the ultimate form. And that's probably, like, the maximum vulnerability. So that's probably, like, level 10 shit. When you go into a therapy office, you're perhaps even more vulnerable than you are with your mate, because you're trying to fix shit, and you're looking for an outside perspective to literally guide you through the wasteland, and they have a torch and you're kind of following their light. And you probably couldn't find the answers, with your, significant other like you could with a therapist. So it really just comes down to just that one image I gave at the fear episode, where you are just opening up your rib cage and you're just saying, hey, don't hurt this. And when you have your heart kind of like on a rock in the woods, that like the vultures are flying around it, but like when you're being even more vulnerable and like honest, that just the same heart, your heart is on a rock in the woods with vultures around, and then there's signs pointing to it too. So especially like when you introduce the truth, and it's weird because every time in my life, at least the past 3 years, because I've really transformed a lot from 2014 to now, and every time I have been open and honest and vulnerable, I have felt so much clarity at the end, and I've really felt more at ease, as if I was tossing that weight off of my shoulders. And it was weird because before I would just hold shit in, like I would hold in feelings, I would hold in good stuff and bad, and it's really hard to just kind of come to terms with those feelings. But when you're being like vulnerable by yourself, there's really something to that shit.
To being vulnerable to yourself and feeling all those feelings. Is that correct?
Yeah, you're literally just letting the shit happen. It's like this one analogy one of my friends say is like, you're just like Goldberg through the fireworks. This wrestler, like when he comes out on stage, he like there's these fireworks going off, and he literally just walks through the fireworks and inhales the smoke, and then he breathes out the smoke kind of like a bull, like, and he just kicks the air, and he's just fucking bad. So that's just literally like he's being vulnerable as fuck, even though he's tough as fuck in that moment. And we kind of need this some sort of vulnerability in order to get stronger. That's kind of fucked up because you have to. It's really rare that people are completely nurtured and not hurt through vulnerability.
Yeah, well, and in terms of like WWE professional wrestling, not like Olympic wrestling, but that's an act of trust. It's a performance where it's choreographed to an extent that you're trusting that the person's not going to hurt you or that they're going to stick to the choreography, and that ultimately you won't get harmed that badly. But then things can still happen. So in that moment, you are being vulnerable to them, weirdly enough.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's choreographed beating the shit out of each other, but there's a term, I guess it's an insider's term, called working snug. So for instance, let's just say that, you have, I'm trying to think of a recent feud, like, wrestler number 1 is injured in the ring. Okay. Wrestler number 2, for wrestler number 2 to work snug, they would still make the match look good. But, when Seth Rollins went against Finn Balor at SummerSlam, Seth threw Finn into the barricade, and Finn Balor blew out his shoulder during the match. He was able to finish the match, but then Finn told him, he's like, hey, man, my shoulder's fucked up. I mean, he didn't say it like that, but then Seth was like, all right, I'll protect you. Like, I'll still make it look like I'm fucking you up, but I'm going to work around that shoulder and still make you look strong.
Yeah. Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah, so...
That's really cool that they... Again, that's a really good analogy of vulnerability, because they're allowing their bodies to be used in this ring. And that when they are vulnerable, somebody to say, hey, I got hurt, you need to, what's the phrase?
Work snug.
Work snug. You need to work snug. He's like, yeah, man, I got you. And he does it. That's awesome.
Yeah, a lot of matches have ended like with injuries like that, and you would never be able to tell because the other guy just carried him, he knocked him out of the ring and he took a rest and he just kind of sold it, and it's just like this kind of dance. And there's even some wrestlers that had genuinely hated each other in the ring, like Matt Hardy and Edge.
Really?
In real life, because like there was a love triangle between Lita, Matt Hardy, and Edge in real life that they actually used in the storyline. So there's a term called potatoing, and that means when you really punch the fuck out of somebody for real.
Oh.
So even though they were punching each other like in the ring, like there was genuine animosity between Matt Hardy and Edge when they had their match over this, and this is still fresh, but they still had to trust each other because they could have easily just crippled each other.
Dude.
They still, Edge isn't wrestling anymore because I think he has spinal stenosis, but Matt Hardy's still around. But even though Edge could have easily just broke his leg.
Spinal stenosis, is that what Sting has? Where like the discs of your spine start fusing together or something like that.
Yeah, it's really gnarly, and it really, I couldn't be an expert on it, but it's really bad. It ends a lot of wrestlers' careers.
Wow.
You know, but they really have to trust each other, and they're so goddamn vulnerable, and
yeah,
you know.
I mean, if that person wanted to in that moment, they're so strong. They seriously know how to harm you if they wanted to, but you trust them and you make yourself vulnerable to them, and that's like what works. And maybe that's part of the reason that people love wrestling or sports where people like get physically intense with each other. Maybe they love seeing people be vulnerable to each other, or they like blood sport.
It could be a mixture of both, because at least with pro wrestling, it's not very sophisticated, but it has all of the traditional archetypes of good versus evil.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the best stories that I've ever seen have been told within wrestling.
That's cool.
You know, like so the story of Daniel Bryan. A few years ago, he was a guy that the fans absolutely loved, and he was adored. And then he was given a shot at the championship against John Cena at SummerSlam 2013. 2013. Beat John Cena clean, meaning he didn't even cheat.
Wow.
And then Randy Orton cashed in his Money in the Bank briefcase. So, no, they weren't going to do anything with Daniel Bryan, you know, and he had to go against the system, because the system on the show was the Authority, Triple H and his wife Stephanie.
Okay.
So, but the people really rallied behind Daniel Bryan, because even like me and myself, like, he was the underdog that people just wanted to see succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to see him succeed because nobody believed in him. So he was very vulnerable at a time where, at least up until WrestleMania, the fans revolted against the original match, which was Randy Orton versus Batista. But then they actually added Daniel Bryan in, and he won at WrestleMania. But a week after that, his dad died.
Shit.
And he got injured, or he had a concussion, and then they said, "Hey, you're pretty fucked up."
Yeah.
But he went out on stage and he relinquished the championship, and he said, "Hey, I have to go." And it was like a real interview too, or a real promo where he said, "I have to relinquish this. I can't. You guys deserve a fighting champion, man. My life's kind of too fucked up right now."
Wow.
That's but the thing is, people loved him even more because he was honest.
Yeah.
You know.
So the vulnerability won him more fans and love.
Yeah, because I think deep down people connect to that.
Yeah.
And I think people connect to one of my favorite comedians is Richard Pryor.
Mm-hmm.
He never, you really couldn't tell the difference between his comedic routine and his real life. He lived a very, very chaotic life, but he was so goddamn vulnerable on stage. He would just leave his heart out there.
That's really true. I mean, just the story alone where he recounts where he was lit on fire and running down the street, and he takes that moment of, first off, I have to imagine there was some shame exposing his drug addiction and talking about it, and on top of that, he lit himself on fire trying to do drugs and then ran outside, and instead he took that moment of vulnerability and made it funny, and he almost used the vulnerability to his advantage because now it's part of his act.
Yeah. But people understood. They were like, fuck, he's not a perfect guy.
Yeah.
Because, in the eyes of, the media and celebrity, people are impenetrable. I can't remember, there's just, this YouTube video where they were talking about action superheroes and how back in the day, it was all, stoic-faced, heroes, the action, so, Arnold Schwarzenegger or Harrison Ford. They just never showed pain. But Bruce Willis in Die Hard, I still haven't seen the movie, but there's a scene where he's digging glass out of his feet, and he is in agonizing fucking pain. But that made it so much more real. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot more action heroes now that are more real and have that real, like they're not like Superman.
Yeah.
You know, because Batman, I think that's why Batman is a lot more adored than Superman, because
I agree.
Superman, like, he has no vulnerability.
He has no vulnerability. I mean, I know the most recent movie, not Batman versus Superman, the one before that, made him vulnerable because he, like, did something that Superman's never supposed to do. But no, everyone likes Batman because he is vulnerable. He's an orphan. But he rose up. Well, I don't really know if he rose above. I mean, he rose above his parents dying. I was thinking, like, it wasn't like he went from, like, orphan on the streets to Bruce Wayne in the sheets. But
right.
But yeah, no. But everyone likes Bruce Wayne because he is vulnerable to his demons at all times.
Yeah, and there's a lot of truth to that. Like, you know, like he's really gone through, like, okay, you have a superhero that's fucking depressed.
Yeah, to say the least. And
he's the world's greatest detective.
Yeah.
You know, because he's good at finding out other people's shit because he's good at finding out his own shit.
Oh, fuck.
So he, like, is able to, like, find out, like, he's like, okay, I could pick up the scent of the alcohol on his breath, and then I could actually put that on my fucking bat gadget, and I could track this scent of alcohol breath and find out where he took the room to the hostage. But he was able to really have that internal, like, examination and see, like, okay, here's my darkness, and this is why I have to become fucking bad.
That's a very interesting analysis of Batman. I like it.
They fucking love him. I love Batman too.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I had to take Batman over Superman, I'd take Batman any day. Because, again, Superman is too perfect. He has no vulnerabilities. He's not human. Batman is human. Literally and metaphorically.
Yeah, he's human because he's vulnerable as fuck. Like, or at least he has human qualities. Like, he's not, like, from Krypton and stuff, but...
Exactly. That's what I meant.
Right, yeah, exactly. You know, like, if you have those human qualities, people understand that a lot more.
Yeah.
You know, it's weird how that works, you know, but it's weird because when you are feeling vulnerable, you don't feel like you are, like, this sort of meta-human.
Yeah.
You're just, you feel weak and scared.
Mm-hmm. But I think to be human is to be vulnerable, as we just illuminated with this whole, like, Batman versus Superman. To be human means you have to be vulnerable. You have to feel pain. You have to open yourself up to people. And ultimately, like, being vulnerable reaps a lot of rewards. Whether it's, like, the wrestling, a professional wrestler who is open about and honest about things and wins fans because he's vulnerable, or even in a relationship. If you can be vulnerable with somebody, you guys get to a deeper level, right? And it's a good feeling to open up because you're letting the black box in your head, you're cracking it open and spilling it out on the floor for this person. Like, you're allowing them to see in, and it feels good to have that release and to know that this person can be a part of it and, like, hear it and will keep it safe and will trust you, and you can trust them.
Exactly, because it's kind of like with physical healing. Like, if you have a wound and it's infected, in order to remove the infection, you have to cut really fucking deep first in order for that to really heal. So it's kind of like when we're vulnerable, we're emotionally healing, at least from ourselves, because it's really hard enough for us to understand ourselves. But if other people can understand us, that makes it a whole lot easier to heal, because it's just like kind of putting on a splint or a cast.
Well, anytime you can connect with a person about something really deep and emotional, it just feels better because you're not only purging the emotions, but someone's connecting to them as well and telling you you're not alone or that you're going to be okay or whatever that is. So it's really, I think that, you know how they say to, like, face your fears every day, or, like, you should do one thing a day that scares you? Maybe on the one hand, people should consider being vulnerable more and how that can benefit them. Either more vulnerable to themselves or more vulnerable to the people around them.
Yeah, and it just takes, like, one little step at a time. Yeah,
and that's not to say that, like, there's definitely relationships or spaces where you can't be vulnerable because you need to preserve yourself. And I think that there's something to be said for the people who withhold and don't make themselves vulnerable, either from experience or, going back to our last topic on trust, like, when someone's vulnerable to you, like, let's say a person who, like, really bottles it all up inside of them, the moment they, like, let it down and let you in, that moment of vulnerability, that's when you know that, like something big has happened.
Yeah. I did have a moment like that about 5 years ago. I have a joke book where ever since I graduated high school, since about 2005, even maybe 2004, I started writing in it. But I have this big book that I keep, and I just put all of my jokes in there. This has never seen the light of day, and I would always talk about it and write shit in there. And to this day, I still write in the thing. Mm-hmm. But at the time, I was pursuing a relationship with somebody, and in that moment, like, she came over to my house and we were having a good time. We went out to eat and stuff, and then in that moment, I just really trusted her, and I showed her my joke book, and that is literally, like, I'd rather take a shit in public like, than share people my joke books, because those are my fucking thoughts, and that's like my being.
It's like letting someone read your diary.
Yeah, like, humor connects me to, like, the people and the things that I love. So if I were to, like, make a document of it and then show that to people, that is extremely fucking vulnerable. And then, she was the first one she was actually the only one who has ever seen it physically, like, in their hands. And then, just from there, there was some intimacy. And then she broke my heart on Christmas and called me and said that she was with another guy. And, I haven't spoken to her since, but from what I know now, she is married to him and has a few children.
Oh my God.
So isn't that quite a joke? But that took me a long time to recover from. Actually, I'll be honest, it took me 4 months to recover from, because it happened Christmas Eve. Actually, I think it, like, bordered on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, because she called me like 11:45, and then, like, we were on the phone for a half an hour, so it bled into Christmas Day.
She called you at 11:45 on Christmas Eve to say, "Brent, I'm with another guy. We're breaking up."
Yeah. So we weren't even really together. I just kind of thought that, like, we were. Like, we were. I don't know. Like, it was one of those things where the next step was the relationship.
So you guys were vulnerable to each other, and clearly you were with this act of showing the joke book, and she totally stomped on that.
Yeah, she was extremely vulnerable to me too, and shared with me, like, some of her deepest, darkest, like, secrets. And I mean, I'm not gonna share any of those with anybody.
Of course.
But we had, like, there was a mutuality with the vulnerability, but it took me a long time to recover. It took me the 4 months, because 4 months later I was going to New York for WrestleMania, and then that's when I went out on stage and did stand up. So it's kind of like I had to regather myself.
Yeah.
But over the years, that fucking joke book is still a very vulnerable part of me, and it's changed dramatically, because I don't even really write jokes in it anymore. I write kind of basis of jokes. So I write, like, thoughts and shit that I could probably make into something bigger.
Yeah.
But that is still, like, I always think, like, when I'm driving home and I hear a fire department, like, I hear, like, the wee wee, the sirens, I'm like, fuck, my house burned down and my joke book is gone. Like, I mean, all of my other shit I'm attached to, like, okay, like, my video games, my bed, and my books, like, my stuff that I have, like, a lot of my sentimental stuff, that is literally like an externalization of my goddamn soul.
Yeah.
And so if people were to hurt that thing or destroy it, I feel like I would be destroyed. But that's the most vulnerable part of me, because it's literally, it has to exist outside of my own head. And I think everybody has that, where their deepest vulnerabilities have to exist outside of themselves, whether that's through their work or their art or even within a relationship.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, did you kind of feel like that when you when like your relationship ended, kind of like, okay, like, so you put all of your you externalized all of your vulnerabilities within somebody else, and now that's over.
Yeah. Like I told that person things that I had inside of me that I never told anybody. And I think one of the hardest things I had to reconcile was like, there's a person walking around with all of the dark thoughts that you have had that you shared with him. He knows those thoughts. And that thing is really scary because, like, I mean, I haven't done anything terrible in my life. I haven't killed anybody. I haven't hurt anyone. I haven't assaulted anyone. But there's definitely things that I'm ashamed of, or like struggles that I have, like insecurities, to go back to episode 2, insecurities I had like with my body. Like I shared all of that with him. I shared with him my struggles with eating and taking care of my body, and I shared all that with him. And then it was really hard. Like I don't know when it hit me, but it was like, there's literally a person who knows like basically your mind, and he's away from you, and he's like doing his thing. And I don't know, for some reason internally I was just like really messed up by that. I think that there is something really freeing about being vulnerable to someone. In our last episode you talked about that like guy who like showed you the pictures of his cut eyeball after his car accident or whatever, and he like told you his life story like every time he saw you. I think there's a release in being vulnerable to people, and I am thinking of like I've been dating since that breakup happened, and there's been a couple different guys who have really been vulnerable to me in the first couple dates, like telling me deep dark shit. One of the guys, we were like, I'm not even joking, we talked about our suicidal ideations on the first date. That's
beautiful.
Is it? Some people call that a red flag. But yeah. We really, and like, but no, he and I talked about like, and I think after we'd been seeing each other for a month or so, I think I made a joke at one point, like, on our first date, we talked about, like, you told me, like, the time you tried to kill yourself. And, like, he's like, yeah, I did. And we also talked about this and this. And like, a part of me then in my head, because, like, I can be vulnerable. I can be an open book like that. And it's a really trusting moment. It's really beautiful. But I also am like, should that be happening? Is that okay? But at the same time, like, I feel really good that those men have told me things that, like, I don't know who they've told in their life. I don't know who else in their world was privileged with that knowledge. So I do take, in the same way that they get a release from that and they benefit from opening up to somebody, I feel I get the benefit of feeling trusted.
Yeah. That definitely makes sense, because it's like a two-way street. Like, mm-hmm. would you say like the vulnerability? So like, if you were vulnerable with somebody, therefore it's like a gift for two people, in a sense.
It is. It's the gift of the person saying whatever it is they're getting off their chest, and then the gift of receiving that knowledge and being like, you trust me as a figure in your life.
Yeah. Like, just like when you were saying that, I was thinking of, like, okay, trust is like a footprint in the snow, but vulnerability is like a footprint in the concrete.
Ooh, unpack that for me.
So, for instance, like, when we want to trust people, or when we have that, it's kind of like we let them know that we've been there.
Yeah.
But when we've been, like, vulnerable with people, that's how we know, we're preserving ourselves. We're leaving a mark.
Yes.
Like, when we're vulnerable with other people.
Yes.
So, and like, the more vulnerable that we are with each other, the bigger the mark that we can leave.
Yes.
And because with trust, it's really deep. Kind of like if you were to step out in the snow.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of the weird things where with time it can kind of melt and go away, and you don't really see that track with someone. So like if you've trusted, like when you trusted your ex, like that's kind of like in the snow now, and like it's kind of drifted over, and you don't see where that mark was made. But because you were vulnerable with him, you know that your footprint is out there somewhere in cement.
Exactly. No, that's a really good analogy. And I think that's like the hardest thing is like when you maybe stop having a relationship, and not even a romantic relationship, when you stop being someone's friend, or maybe you disconnect from family members or something like that, knowing that there's people walking around with all your vulnerabilities stamped inside of them. And here's the thing too, like as a human, you have to remember that it's kind of foolish to think that this person remembers every single vulnerability that you expose to them. Like that's ridiculous. Like why would they catalog that shit in their brain? But to you, it's like this important, immense thing, like giving somebody, if we're going to use like the cracking open the rib cage and giving your heart again, it's like literally like segmenting a part of your heart, giving it to them, and then it's like this beautiful part of you that you've given away, and you think they're going to have it forever, but of course it could slip away, slip out of their hands, fall out of their pocket, dog ate it one day, I don't know.
Yeah, and especially because it's concrete, they could use that as a weapon against you.
They could kill somebody with that thing.
Really? Like, at least if they don't kill you personally, they would kill your reputation.
Ouch. Yeah, that's true. But like, I mean, yeah, it depends on what you're being vulnerable about. You know, like me, like, if you really said my, like, deepest, darkest shit that Gabi, like, you know, has hated the way she looks and, like, been crappy to her body before, like, I'm sure most people would be like, oh, okay. Like, that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine, and you're kind of a dick for saying that.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know, you know? So I have no reason to, like, I'm happy we talked about it, because now I'm just like, yeah, actually, as I say it out loud, like, if this person were to be like, yeah, Gabi totally had, like, all these issues with, like, food and binge eating and purging or whatever, and she really struggled with her body image and whatever, they'd probably be like, wow, that's intense. Why are you sharing this with me?
Yeah, like he would be such a dickhead, man.
Yeah, he would be such a dickhead if he did that. I mean, I don't think he's going to, obviously.
No.
But now it's funny because, like, I was just vulnerable about stuff, and then I got off my chest, like, I'm really worried my ex is thinking about all those terrible things that I told him. And then I'm like, you know what? If you actually said them, it really wouldn't be the worst thing in the world.
Right. So it's crazy. You had that moment of clarity, like,
I did.
Just now.
Yeah. Again, it's like the podcasting is an act of vulnerability. We're going through the deepest, darkest parts of humanity in our minds and fleshing them out in this podcast.
Yeah. And most of the stuff that we're saying, like, it has, like, we're carrying around these feelings.
Yeah.
But they haven't been articulated.
Exactly.
So just, like, saying them and being, you know, kind of true with ourselves, like, in a way that we're just really fucking articulating that. We're turning it into the truth. We're making it, like, we're making it a footprint in the fucking concrete.
Yeah, we are.
So,
We're exactly doing that.
So, but yeah. So where do we go from here, though?
Where do we go from here?
With being, like, vulnerable. Like, what's, like, the end game?
Like, what's the point of being vulnerable?
Yeah.
I think if we want to, I just love your image of the ribcage opening and someone, like, you know, take care of this. I think it's ultimately both of you crack the rib cages open, and you both just, like, you can either bask in the glow and the warmth of the heart, or you each, you know, feel that. I think ultimately the end game of vulnerability is getting closer with the person.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and it's that ultimate reward, because you gotta. It's weird. You have to, like, go. You have to be down to go up. You know, it's kind of like you have to fucking you know, like, night is dark as before it's dawn. I'm trying to think of something really fucking cheesy right now to say, but I can't.
Wait,
really.
And it's always darkest before the dawn didn't work?
It didn't match.
Okay.
Like, it's kind of like, I might as well have just said, let go and let God, let the river flow, easy does it. You know, like AA stuff, AA slogan.
I was like, what is he quoting? What is that?
A lot of AA stuff. But,
why do you know a lot of AA stuff?
I used to go to meetings. I used to go to adult children of alcoholics meetings.
Oh, yeah. Actually, someone close to me today actually was telling me about that and that they used to go to them. And they were talking about how they made their kids go to it and how it was really, really beneficial for them, because if you want to talk about vulnerability,
goddamn,
seriously, and an Al-Anon, oh my god, which is interesting because they recognize how vulnerable it is, and that's why it's anonymous. Because if someone knows that you are an alcoholic, a drug addict, or whatever, like, it's a big deal. Like obviously, like, that's, and I think it's partially that our society doesn't treat addiction like a disease. I think that has a lot to do with it. But because if people just were like, well, you're sick, you're ill, like, you need help, you need treatment, then it'd be better, because there's a lot of people who just think it's choice. But clearly Alcoholics Anonymous realizes that it's a vulnerable position to be in, to declare yourself as an alcoholic or an addict, and that's why they make it anonymous. Yeah,
like the first step is like you have to admit that you are completely powerless over alcohol.
Is that really it?
Yeah. The wording is a little bit different, but just like you have to admit that you're powerless over it, and then you have to, like, your life has become unmanageable.
Wow. That's intense.
Yeah, and then the second step is kind of more of like reconciliation. Like you begin the path to reconciliation, but like when you go to that first fucking meeting, it's the worst, because you're like, because you always see in the movies, like, there's always one guy that gives profound speeches, but there's just a lot of regular people in those meetings, and it's really nice to know that you're not the craziest one in the room.
Yeah.
And everyone's so fucking vulnerable. Like, I actually went to an Al-Anon meeting yesterday.
Wow.
With a friend, and we made this, hey, my name is blah blah blah, how you doing? Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, by the way, here's my whole fucking, like, here's all my shit. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But it's like an acceptable, it's not like the guy at the department store just showing me a picture of his eye. Like, there was a purpose to sharing these stories, and like we all connected based on like being extremely vulnerable, not only with each other but just with people we fucking love.
Well, and like, think about that like Al-Anon in that way creates spaces for people to be vulnerable together. Like, in a wrestling ring, those two performers are vulnerable to each other. In a relationship, romantic or familial or friend, you're vulnerable to each other when you share things and information and your deepest, darkest secrets with each other. So it's really interesting that, like, sharing, like, the potential for harm is, like, what it means to be vulnerable. That you allow yourself to be in this state that if that person wanted, they could fucking hurt you with that information. They could hurt you physically, so on and so forth. But they don't.
Yeah, and it's weird because usually, like, those relationship dynamics, not only with wrestling, but with relationships, but if one person is not choosing to be vulnerable, it never works out.
Yeah.
Like, if in a wrestling match, like, let's just say, like, John Cena just said, fuck it, and just beat the living shit out of Randy Orton, and just almost killed him. Yeah. It's not a good wrestling match. No. Or if you're in a relationship, like, where you feel like that you've really given yourself to somebody, and they're not giving you anything, it's not being reciprocal, or they're very guarded, that's an unhappy relationship.
Yeah, when you feel like you're giving and being vulnerable, and the person either isn't, or they're taking advantage of your vulnerability, and like the dark secrets or the things that you allow them to see that you don't show other people, they use it against you. Like, that's obviously terrible and like abusive context, but
yeah. So if I were to maybe like define what vulnerability is, it's perhaps like, at least on the terms that I'm thinking of based on our conversation, is perhaps an emotional willingness to tolerate pain. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, I'm trying to work that out, but like, if you were like what does it mean to you, like, to be vulnerable? Like, if you were to define it.
Yeah, I would say to be vulnerable is to open yourself up to emotional or physical stress or pain. I almost want to add the caveat, with the hope that the person will not take advantage of you.
Yeah.
I almost feel like, too, like, to be vulnerable, I was going to add, like, to be vulnerable is to open yourself up to emotional or physical harm from someone you trust. But as we've kind of talked about, you can be vulnerable with people you don't even know.
Yeah, that's true.
like my first date experience.
Yeah, or even like in the AAA meetings, like you're not gonna be like, ha ha, your parents did that to you, you stupid.
Well, also you can't. Like for A, you'd be the worst fucking person in the world. B, I'm sure someone would kick your ass. C, yeah, no.
Yeah, there's no crosstalk either.
Crosstalk? Oh, I understand.
So like if someone's saying like, yeah, this happened to me, you're like, haha, that fucking sucks. You can't even say that.
No, you can't like cut them off like, I was abused as a child. Yeah, me too. Like you can't do that.
No, like, oh yeah, like this reminded me of like when I was a kid. This is something that was so much more worse than what you experienced.
Yeah,
I just filled in the shit. Like, you can't do that shit.
Do you ever think that there's someone in like the meeting who like wants to share their life story and like they think that like they need to get something off their chest, and then the person before them has like the absolute worst life story, and then do you think that person just like clams up and is like, well, shit, I can't say anything.
Yeah, my first meeting, like that, there was a guy in there like that. He was sitting there and he shared with us like some of like the scariest, darkest shit. And everyone else was like, I think I'm okay. I think I just need to, I just gotta walk it off.
I think I'm just gonna go home and hug my wife. And
yeah, I'll just get over it. I'll just maybe rent a movie or watch the game. I mean, but yeah, I don't have to deal with what you did. So,
do you think they hire him? Do you think they hire him and put him in the meetings to like lay out his terrible life so everyone else is like, no, actually, I'm good, okay. I'm done with alcohol.
Like the scared straight guys, like trying to like yeah. You want to go to jail? You want to go to school? It's like, but that's the thing is. There's only one person who has ever had it the absolute worst, and then one person who's had it the absolute best, and everybody else is fighting in between. There's billions of fucking people on this planet, and there's only two people who could hold those distinctions.
Do you really think, though, that we could say that one person in this world has had the absolute worst existence?
We probably could. If we were to like break down the criteria, so like okay, like their economic status, their emotional stability, their familial relationships, their friendships, their success, like their self-fulfillment, their physical health. Like it's like if you apply that criteria, probably it's obviously all subjective. It's kind of like a top 10 list of the best movies of the year.
Well, I was gonna say it's kind of like, well, even in that criteria, like you'll probably find, let's say we get 10 people who all fall under that criteria. How do we pick between the 10 of them who has the worst existence?
Right.
All subjective.
Yeah, it's all completely subjective. And a lot of the times we kind of don't want to put ourselves in that list because there's always that one person who's had it a whole lot fucking worse. And you're like, ugh, at least,
yeah,
that's a lot more. I probably would have, I would not have been able to survive.
Well, it's often used as like fodder against you. Like, quit your bitching. This person's had it harder, which I think is ridiculous. Like, that's one thing we should talk about, like in vulnerability. When you're vulnerable to somebody, like let's say I like opened up to somebody like, yeah, I'm really insecure about my body and I really struggle with it and eating well and taking care of myself, and then they're like, fuck you, you fucking baby, just eat a goddamn salad and work out.
Yeah.
That would be the worst experience ever. Not ever, I'm being hyperbolic, but like that's why people are afraid of being vulnerable. Because there's the potential the person's going to be like, you're a fucking baby, get over it.
Yeah, I'm wondering like if that's generational or cultural. Like so, like if there's like a older generation of people who are the raise yourself up by your bootstraps generation, where like they just never acknowledged pain, emotional or physical. Like they'd wake up and like they'd have, so like instead of like if they stepped on a thumbtack, instead of pulling out the thumbtack, they just cut their fucking foot off.
Because it's easier to live without the foot than
fuck it. I don't have to worry about it. Like,
or cut off my foot, whatever, you fucking baby.
So, like, do you think that, like, as a people, we're kind of getting better with being more vulnerable, or is it being more accepted? Like, where do you think we are with that?
I think the internet and blogging and Tumblr allows people to be really vulnerable. Like, there's, even something like a Zanga, a live journal, where you could, like, fucking put out your heart and soul and everything that was happening to you. That, I think, has allowed people to be more vulnerable. I also think, though, it's weird because on the one hand, you can find some great safe spaces on the internet where you can open up about things and people will receive you with open arms and comfort you and say you're not alone and try to help you. There's also the potential that someone's going to eat you alive and troll you or whatever. So on the one hand, I want to say, yeah, it's helpful. You can be vulnerable and people will embrace you. But that's not the reality. That's not always the case. There's definitely shitty fucking people on the internet waiting to fucking troll you or be harmful. Just be shitty.
Yeah, and just read any YouTube comment.
Go on any YouTube video ever.
Anyone that allows comments, like you will see like the shittiest like thing imaginable, like the shittiest comments imaginable, and they're always fighting. It usually breaks out into a race war. Like on the YouTube comments, and it's just like, Jesus Christ.
I don't know what YouTube videos you're going on, but I have not experienced that.
Go to any YouTube video, like
any
literally.
video.
Go to like go to Despacito. I guarantee you. Or just go to like some guy's review of the electric turkey fryer.
Yes.
And then you'll see, like, you're gonna die! Put your head in the fire, asshole!
So, and he wasn't even being vulnerable. He was being vulnerable to the fryer. The turkey was being vulnerable to the oil. But
the good news is, it really fucking sucks to be vulnerable. But I think we need that to preserve ourselves. Yeah, we definitely need that shit.
I totally agree. I think there's something human, or something uniquely human you gain from being vulnerable to somebody. You gain a sense of, like, comfort, a sense of peacefulness, all of that stuff. And I really am brought back to, I always come back to your image, but there's a painting or, like, a work of art that some woman on the internet made. I think she was from, or he was from Portugal or something. He stylizes himself as like a kind of like a human body, but with like a crow skull for a head, and this like woman creature. It's supposed to represent his relationship. And there's this one image where they're lying in bed together, and his rib cage is literally like exposed, and she has her heart on it and is gripping it, but is sleeping on his chest while holding his heart in her hands, and he's kind of like over her, holding her. And I'm brought back to that image of vulnerability and how that's how it is in romantic relationships, but it doesn't end there. The vulnerability doesn't have to be just emotional. It can be physical, it can be financial, it can be emotional, mental.
Yeah. So would you say that it's the only, perhaps not the only, but perhaps the most key part in order to find happiness?
The most key? Fuck.
Or do you think that might be something to think about for our next podcast about happiness and contentness?
I think we're just gonna have to leave it for our next episode on happiness and contentness.
Yeah, because there's gonna be a whole egg to crack with that one.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
All right, this was fun.
Yeah, so thank you guys for listening. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and be good to each other.
Bye.